Instead of millions, her husband left Alena an old shack. Opening the door, she couldn't believe her eyes. But before we continue, please write in the comments which city you're watching this video from. Enjoy. 4 months of silence that cut deeper than any noise, deeper than his raspy cough that she heard in the last months of his life. She still waited for him to walk through the door, take off his worn-out sneakers, leaving traces of dirt on the doormat, and say in his slightly hoarse voice, "Well, Alina, how about some tea?" But the door remained closed, and the kettle was silent, covered in a thin layer of dust. Nikita didn't leave right away. It was a long, exhausting battle that drained them both. It all started with what they thought was a cold. He coughed, complained of fatigue, but brushed it off, saying, "It'll pass, Alena, don't worry." She made him go to the doctor only after 2 weeks, when he started gasping for air at night, and his skin turned pale, almost translucent. The diagnosis was like a death sentence: stage 4 lung cancer. The doctor, an elderly man with tired eyes, took her aside and quietly said, "We'll do everything we can, but prepare yourself." Alina didn't cry then, she simply didn't believe it. Nikita, her Nikita, with his broad smile and habit of humming old tunes, couldn't be gone. He was only 32. They fought chemotherapy, endless IVs injections that left bruises on his thin arms. Alina remembered every day, how he squeezed her hand when the pain became unbearable, how he tried to joke even when his voice grew weak. "Look, Alina, I'm as bald as that alley cat now," he would say, and she would laugh through her tears, stroking his head where dark curls used to be. But with each passing day, he faded, his once vibrant and warm eyes grew duller, and his breath became labored, as if someone invisible was turning him off piece by piece. The doctors said there was a chance. They tried everything: experimental drugs that cost a fortune, trips to another clinic 300 km away where they promised a miracle. Alina sold their car, took out a loan, begged Elena Pavlovna for help. Her mother-in-law came every time, bringing homemade soup and sitting by his bed, whispering prayers that Nikita never liked. But even that didn't help. In his final weeks he stayed home. The hospital said there was nothing more they could do. Alina slept on a chair next to the bed, holding his hand, afraid to let go even for a second. She saw him fading, his chest barely rose, and every breath was a struggle for life that was no longer there. On that last night, he opened his eyes for the first time in a day and looked at her. "Don't cry, Alina," he whispered, his voice so weak she could barely make out the words. She pressed against him, feeling the cold of his skin, and promised she wouldn't. But when his breathing stopped and silence filled the room, she screamed so loudly that the neighbors knocked on the wall. She held him until the ambulance arrived, until Elena Pavlovna pulled her away, crying herself. Now, sitting on the sofa, Alina looked at the mug and remembered his last words. She couldn't understand how to live, how to breathe in a world where he no longer existed. The door remained closed, and the kettle was silent, and that silence was the worst because he wasn't in it. On the day the notary read the will, Alina's world crumbled for the second time. Everything they had built together, the small apartment with a view of the park, the car they drove to the sea. Even their shared savings went to his mother, Elena Pavlovna. Alina, the wife who had shared every day with Nikita for the past 7 years, inherited only an old house in the village of Lesnaya Polyana, a place she had only heard of in passing. The will contained just 3 words from him: for a new beginning. She reread them until the paper was soaked with tears, but the meaning eluded her. What did it mean? Why did he decide this way? Elena Pavlovna, a tall woman with tired eyes, looked at her with sympathy but said nothing. Alina felt betrayed, not only by Nikita but by everything they had created together. She left the notary's office without a word, clutching the key to the house that was now her only inheritance. The apartment was empty. Boxes with Nikita's sweaters, books, an old tape recorder stood against the wall, ready to be sent to charity. Elena couldn't open them. Each item was filled with his scent, his laughter, his warmth. She sat on the floor, looking at these boxes, trying to understand why he left her only the house. Was it a joke or a punishment? They had dreamed of so much children travels, a studio where she could paint, and he could compose music. But now it all seemed like a distant dream. The next day, after the meeting with the notary, there was a knock at the door. Alina, still in Nikita's old t-shirt that she hadn't taken off since yesterday, slowly got up from the sofa. She wasn't expecting visitors, and who could come to her empty world. Opening the door, she saw Elena Pavlovna. Her mother-in-law stood on the threshold, holding a woven basket from which emanated the warm, spicy aroma of brown pie, the very one Nikita had loved since childhood. His eyes would light up when he talked about how his mom baked this pie for his birthdays and how he once spilled tea on himself trying to cut a bigger piece. Now this scent was like a punch in the gut, sweet, familiar, and unbearably painful. Elena Pavlovna looked up, her usually stern and composed face was creased with grief. Wrinkles around her eyes deepened, and her lips trembled as if she had been holding back tears all the way here. "Alina," she began, her voice breaking like a thin thread. She stepped forward and, without asking, hugged Alina. It was an awkward, almost desperate embrace. Alina's hands trembled, and her fingers clung to Alina's shoulders as if afraid she would disappear. Alina froze, feeling Alina's hot tears falling on her shoulder, soaking the fabric of the t-shirt. They stood like that for a few seconds, and in that silence, only their uneven breathing could be heard. "I didn't want it to be like this," Alina finally said, pulling away. She placed the basket on the table and wiped her face with the back of her hand, but tears still flowed, leaving shiny trails on her cheeks. "I don't understand, Alina. I don't understand why he did this." She looked at her with such bewilderment that Alina saw for the first time not the stern mother-in-law, but a mother who had lost her son and the meaning of his final decision. "The apartment, the money. I didn't ask for it. I would have given you my share if I could. You were his wife, you were his life. How could he leave you only this house?" Elena sat down on a chair, her hands helplessly rested on her knees, fidgeting with the edge of her coat as if seeking comfort in the motion. "I stayed up half the night thinking, maybe I missed something, maybe he told me something, and I didn't hear. He always took care of you. Remember how he ran to me when you were sick and asked for the recipe for that chicken soup? He said you only ate it when you were ill." She smiled weakly but then started crying again, covering her face with her hands. "And know this, I would give you everything myself, Alina. The apartment, the car, everything. You just say the word if you need anything, money, help. I don't want you to think I'm happy about this will." Alina stood silently looking at her, her throat tightened and she couldn't utter a word. The pie on the table exuded an aroma that was Nikita, his childhood, his joy, his warmth. She suddenly remembered how he once baked her the same pie, but forgot to add sugar, and they laughed until they cried, chewing on the bitter pastry. Now this scent was like a ghost she couldn't embrace. "He must have had a plan," Alina whispered, not knowing where the words came from. "I don't understand, but he couldn't have just." She fell silent, feeling a lump of doubt growing inside her. Elena looked at her with eyes full of pain and hope. "Do you think you'll go there, to that house?" she asked, her voice filled with pleading, as if she was asking Alina to find an answer not only for herself but for her as well. Alina nodded, even though inside she screamed with fear and resentment. She didn't want to go, didn't want to see this house, but Elena's words, her tears, her trembling hands, her sincere bewilderment touched something deep inside her. And there was that pie that Nikita loved so much. Maybe he really left her more than it seemed, maybe behind this strange will there was something she was meant to find on her own. Elena squeezed her hand, and Alina felt the warmth of her palm, rough, calloused, but so alive. "I want to understand my boy," Alina said, her voice breaking again. Alina nodded again, but inside she felt a growing sense that behind Elena's tears and words lay not only pain, but a secret that Alina herself had not yet realized. That evening, Looking at the stars outside the window, Alina made a decision. She would go to Lesnaya Polyana, not to live there now. She couldn't imagine herself in the countryside, but to understand what Nikita wanted to tell her. She packed a suitcase, a warm jacket, an old photo album where she and Nikita laughed on the beach, and that mug. It was all she could take with her from their past. The road to Lesnaya Polyana stretched for 3 hours. Alina drove in silence. The radio hissed and faded, leaving her alone with her thoughts. Outside the window, bare trees covered in frost flashed by as if frozen in morning. She remembered how Nikita once said, "If I go, don't hold on to me for too long, okay?" She had laughed it off then, brushing it aside. "You're not going anywhere." Now, those words burned inside her. She imagined the house, a dilapidated hut with a leaky roof, cold and abandoned. "Why did you do this, Nikita?" she whispered, gripping the steering wheel. But deep down a spark flickered, faint and almost imperceptible, that maybe he had left her not just a house, but something more, something she couldn't see yet. When the car turned onto the gravel road covered in snow, Alina felt her heart tighten. Lesnaya Polyana appeared before her, a few houses buried in snowdrifts and a silence so deep it seemed the world held its breath. The house stood on the outskirts of the village, surrounded by birch trees. Its facade was dilapidated, the paint peeled, and the porch creaked underfoot. Alina sighed, expecting the worst, and turned the key in the lock. The door opened with a long creak, and she stepped inside. But instead of dampness and neglect, she was greeted by coziness, a wooden table covered with a lace tablecloth, a soft sofa with a knitted blanket. Even the stove in the kitchen looked new, as if someone had been taking care of this place. Alina froze, not believing her eyes. On the windowsill stood a small old figurine, their talisman with Nikita. He had brought it from one of his trips and said, "This is you and me, always together, even in the dark." She ran her finger over the dusty figurine, and tears welled up on their own for the first time in months. She smiled, feeling Nikita's presence nearby. She walked through the house, touching every item. There were no coincidences here, everything was chosen with love. On the wall hung a photograph, she and Nikita on their wedding day. He hugged her, and she laughed, tilting her head back. Alina pressed her hand to the glass, whispering, "Did you know I would come?" The next day, Alina decided to explore the basement. It was cold, smelled of earth and old wood. She noticed a cabinet standing slightly askew, and driven by curiosity, moved it aside. Behind it was a door low with peeling paint. Her heart pounded as she opened it. Behind the door was a room spacious, with a high window through which soft winter light streamed in. In the center stood an easel, next to it a box of brushes and paints. This was the studio, their studio. They had dreamed of such a place, lying in each other's arms at night. She would paint, and he would play the guitar. Alina trembled, feeling tears welling up again. On the table in the studio lay a letter, a folded sheet of paper, slightly yellowed, as if it had been waiting for her here for too long. His handwriting slightly uneven, with loops on the L's and soft curves on the T's. She would recognize it out of 1,000. Alina unfolded the paper with trembling fingers, feeling her heart ache at the sight of those familiar lines. She sat down on a chair, afraid her legs would give way, and began to read. "Alina, my dear Alina, if you are reading this, it means you came after all. I knew you wouldn't be able to stay away. You were always more stubborn than me. Forgive me for making you go through this. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. You probably think I abandoned you, giving everything to Mom and leaving you only this old house. But believe me, I didn't want to hurt you. I wanted to give you a chance at the life you deserve. Remember how we used to dream? Lying at night, you would rest your head on my chest, and I would play with your hair, telling you about how we would one day go somewhere quiet where you could paint, and I could strum my silly melodies on the guitar. You would laugh and say I was hopeless with music, and I would reply that you were too kind, praising my drawings. We made plans, Alina, and I so wanted to make them come true. But life had other plans. When I found out I was sick, I didn't tell you right away. I didn't want to see fear in your eyes. You had already been through so much, all those hospitals, my tantrums, nights when I coughed until morning, and you sat by my side holding my hand. You were my light, Alena. Every day I looked at you and thought, how lucky I am that you chose me. And every day I was afraid that you would get tired of it all, that you would leave. But you stayed. Even when I became a shadow of my former self. You stayed. This house is not just a house. I prepared it for you. Remember how you said you wanted a studio with a big window to paint sunsets? I found this place 2 years ago when I went fishing with a friend. It was abandoned, but I saw you in it, your paints, your canvases, your smile when you create. I quietly fixed it up while I still could. Mom helped, even though she grumbled that I was wasting my last bit of strength. But I knew what I was doing. Don't grieve for me too long, okay? I know you will cry. I can't stop you even now as I write this. I can barely see the letters through my own tears. But I want you to live, Alena. Paint. You were always happiest when you painted. I saw it in your eyes, in the way you lost track of time as the brush danced across the canvas. Here in Lesnaya Polyana, you will find yourself not the one who lost me, but the one who can start over. I will always be with you in every mosquito. In every day, in the rustle of the wind outside the window. When it gets tough, look at the sunset. I'll be there. I promise. And don't be mad at Mom. She didn't know about my decision until the end. I just wanted her to have something to remember me by, to remember you. I left you the future. I love you, Alena, more than words can express. You are my everything. Forgive me for leaving so soon. Live for both of us, okay? Yours, Nikita. Alena finished reading, and the letter slipped from her hands. Tears streamed down her cheeks, dripping onto the floor, but she didn't try to stop them. She pressed her hands to her chest as if she could hold his words inside her, and whispered softly, I love you too, Nikita. She looked out the window. The sun was setting, painting the sky in golden and pink hues that he loved so much. Alena stood up, approached the easel, and picked up a brush. Her hands trembled, but she began to paint his sunset. With each stroke she let him go, but not forever. She painted until her tears dried up, until she felt that he was truly there with her in that house, in that studio, in that sky. I love you, Nikita, she whispered, looking at the canvas, and for the first time in months, she felt him smile back at her from beyond the horizon. Alena fell to her knees, clutching the letter to her chest. She cried, not from pain, but because for the first time, she felt him so close. He hadn't abandoned her, he had left her a dream. Alena decided to stay, not forever, she told herself, but just for a while, to figure out what to do next. On the third day, old man Kuzmish, a local with a beard like a cloud and kind eyes, knocked on her door. Heard you're the new owner, he rumbled, handing her a bundle of firewood. He helped fix the roof, showed her how to light the stove, and even brought an old kettle so she wouldn't be bored. That same evening, a skinny gray cat with huge green eyes meowed at the doorstep. Alena couldn't turn her away. You'll be fluffy, she said, setting out a bowl of milk. The cat curled up by the stove, and Alena slept without nightmares for the first time. Days passed slowly, the crunch of snow underfoot, the scent of pine resin from the fire, the rustle of wind in the branches all enveloped her like a warm blanket. She took out her paints and began to paint, at first tentatively, then with growing confidence. For the first time in years, the brush in her hands came to life. Lesnaya Polyana became her world. Alena laughed as she watched Fluffy chase snowflakes and captured these scenes on canvas. Her paintings came to life, kittens tangled in snowdrifts, bullfinches on branches, mist floating over the forest. Winter here was different, clean, sparkling, not like in the city, where snow turned to slush. Alena would step out onto the porch with a cup of tea and watch the sun set behind the birch trees, painting the sky in pink and gold. One day she painted Nikita not as he was at the end, pale and weak, but young, with a guitar in his hands. She added gold paint to his eyes, and tears mixed with the paints on the canvas. You would be proud of me, she whispered, stroking Fluffy. Her art became her way of talking to him, quiet but alive. In the spring, Elena Pavlovna came to visit. She entered the house, holding a basket of homemade jam, and froze at the sight of the paintings. Alina, this is incredible, she whispered, admiring a watercolor portrait of Fluffy against the backdrop of the snow-covered house. Her eyes filled with tears. Nikita always said you had a gift. She mentioned that an old friend of hers worked in publishing and was looking for an illustrator for children's books. Give it a try, Elena said. Alina hesitated but agreed. A month later, her cats, bullfinches, and houses of Lesnaya Polyana adorned the pages of fairy tales. Children wrote her letters, and she cried reading them, realizing that her pain had turned into light for others. Elena confessed, he wanted you to find yourself. That's why he left you this house. Alina hugged her, and for the first time in a long time, they cried together, not from grief, but from relief. Lesnaya Polyana had become home. Old man Kuzmich once said, "You've brought this village to life, girl." Alina smiled, looking at Fluffy curled up by the stove. She thought of Nikita every day, but now those thoughts were warm memories. His letter lay in the drawer, and the old figurine stood on the shelf, reminding her that he was still with her. Her paintings spread around the world, inspiring others, and Alina understood that even in loss there is a beginning. She found herself in Lesnaya Polyana, in the strokes of her brush, in the rustle of the wind. And somewhere beyond the horizon, Nikita smiled at her. She was sure of it,